Hey guys, to help run the forums, host the website, and travel, we've introduced a universal service fee for in-depth coverage, including this video. The goal is to be transparent and unbiased. This is not an endorsement. It's a privilege to serve you. Let's get into it. Hey, what's going on, guys? So I am actually here in Upper East Manhattan. Behind me is the East River and a pretty cool electric bike called the Buzz from a company called Buzz. So this bike is called the Buzz. It's pretty fun. We've been here on this kind of like walkway, bikeway, rollerblade way path along the river here. It's been quite enjoyable. So let me go ahead and tell you a little bit about the bike and how it works. All right, so as I mentioned before, this bike is called the Buzz. Of course, it has the lettering across here to tell you that it's Buzz, both the brand and the bicycle itself, as well as kind of like some yellow aesthetics to it, like on the grips here, on the stem, and of course the seat post collar, as well as a little bumblebee that's kind of put right there in the middle of the bike, and also on the front platform. So it's a Buzz bike through and through. And I'm told actually these yellow accents follow the bike depending on which color you get, because it does come in a couple of colors such as silver, this black, and green, but the accents stay yellow from what I understand, to kind of coincide with the Buzz marketing. Anyways, so the Buzz bike, let's go ahead and jump into the bike features, specifications. So what this bike is made for is really approachability, I guess I would say, accessibility. The bike does have a pretty low step through. As you can see, it's about an 18-inch standover height on there, so it's really easy to get into. The minimum saddle height is also pretty low. The center of gravity on the bicycle is a little bit lower because you have a smaller wheel front and back. As well, you have the weight of the motor and the battery in the middle, along with the rider weight, of course. So all in all, things are kind of lowered a little bit, and that gives it a lot better stability as you're turning, as you're gaining speed, as you're starting out. So it's a pretty easy bike to get into, a pretty easy bike to jump on and start pedaling without a whole lot of considerations for the rider size or even skill level in some cases. So I would definitely call this an approachable bike for riders of all sorts of sizes and ages and skill sets as well. Let's go ahead and jump into some of the mechanical specs, and then I'll get into the electric, because it's a new electric system for me that I haven't tried out until now. So I'm pretty excited to tell you all about it. Coming in line with some of the main features of the bike is the tire size. So this is a 24-inch by 3. So these are 24-inch wheel front and back, but it's a pretty darn tall tire. As you can see, you've probably got a good 2 inches, maybe 3 or so, as far as height of the rubber here. So the total size from rubber to rubber is somewhere around 26, even though you're on a 24-inch wheel. And they kind of also have a pretty wide surface area for the bike to ride on as well. That gives it a lot of stability, and you can see there's kind of a crown as it kind of shapes over to kind of give you more of a surface that kind of articulates as you turn the bike. These are not what I call a brand name tire, and that kind of follows some of the theme for the components, where you have a really good design of the bike. It feels really nice when you ride it, but because of the price point, they chose to use some parts that don't have a really big brand name here in the United States. For example, these tires, well, they feel really nice. These are from a company called Hangzhou Rubber Factory, which is not a big name in the United States that I've heard of. And these are specifically called a Chaoyang tire. So of course they come from China, like a lot of parts do from electric bikes or just bicycles in general, if you didn't know by chance. The brakes also are another part. Don't want to get too far away. The brakes are called a Ying brake. It works just fine. It's a mechanical disc brake that pulls onto that 160 millimeter rotor. They work fine for this kind of a bike. I don't know if I'd use those particular brakes for heavy use or maybe even cargo or mountain bike. I don't think they'd do well here. But for a bike like this that is, just kind of a bike that's really approachable for someone to jump on and go around the neighborhood, maybe some errands, I think they do just good. Going alongside with that, on the front end here, you have 100 millimeter hub spacing, 15 millimeter axles, 13 gauge spokes. That's kind of standard equipment for what we're dealing with. I did mention the 160 millimeter rotor on the front. That's also mirrored on the back as well. On the solid fork, you do have mounted some metal fenders, or a metal fender up front, which is mirrored in the back. I like metal fenders a lot because they don't get twisted and rub against the tire. They're pretty darn set. And up here you do have an integrated light. Kind of talk about that a little bit with the electric system. But one special note that I do like about this integrated light is that it has a metal bracket. It's unfortunately common that if you see a plastic bracket on those, that the plastic bracket breaks and then the light kind of dangles down. It really kind of gets in the way. This case, it's not so much an issue because you have a nice metal bracket there that's keeping the light on the front of the fender, and that's a really good feature that I personally like quite a lot. Coming up to the headset here, you have mounted onto the frame a nice little rack. So I don't know the weight capacity in particular of this rack, but it's mounted directly onto the frame with this little mounting position here. Now granted, it's not mounted on both sides of the headset up here, it's just mounted on the front. And due to the size, you're not going to carry a ton of weight in here. You know, you're probably not going to get 35 pounds worth of batteries up front, but you could totally carry a small bag, you know, maybe a couple of groceries or something like that in here pretty easily. And that's pretty convenient too. They have the reflector on the front mounted up on the tippy front of the bike, which is nice. Coming up to the control area, I don't want to get ahead of myself because I do want to talk about the display. But alongside with those brakes from Ying Ing that I kind of mentioned, these levers, you know, this is a nice wide lever to it. Not a whole lot of features on there. These do have a barrel adjuster for your brakes, but it doesn't have motor inhibitors on the brake handle or on the brake caliper itself. A motor inhibitor is a feature in which when you pull on the brakes, it stops energy going to the motor at all, so you're never fighting against it. That particular feature is absent on these brake handles. You know, it's just one of the choices they make to try to keep the price point low. Also up here you do have a bell. Pretty nice, especially when you're on a walkway such as this one. It's a kind of a high traffic area in a lot of spots. The grips are a flat foam grip with locks on both sides, so it's kind of an interesting choice because they have the locking rings on both ends, which keep it nice and stable, you know. And I think they went that way because you can have the colored rings on both sides, so they can kind of keep that yellow aesthetic for like a beehive kind of feeling to it, which is, you know, pretty cool. But nonetheless, that flat rubber, you know, it doesn't have like an ergonomic kind of padding to it. However, it does collapse quite a bit, so it's, you know, kind of comfortable as you grip it. You do have kind of a small rise in the handlebars that kind of come up from the stem a little bit. They do have a tiny back sweep, about 5 degrees or so, not a whole lot. But the handlebars are still relatively narrow, and that's due to like its city-esque kind of riding. You're not going to be doing a whole lot of technical riding, so keeping a narrow handlebar is nice for when you have to get it inside of an elevator, which I have done with this bike here in New York. So the stem itself has a small amount of rise to it, about 100 millimeters for length. And that comes into the headset here with the colored spacers in there. So that's nice. I'd probably switch this out to an adjustable stem, which you could totally do. You could totally switch this out to an adjustable stem. You could get the handlebars to come up a little bit. That would kind of meet the rider, because right now I wouldn't necessarily call this a cruiser bike, but it's really, really close. And a couple of small adjustments, you would have a very comfortable cruiser. And I'll get back to that in a second. So coming down into the main part of the frame, you have a pretty big down tube to accommodate the battery in here. And that comes down into the mid-drive motor. So let's talk about the seat. So the seat itself is actually pretty darn comfortable. So this uses a kind of foam that I'm told is called PU, as in the letters P and then U. It's about 8 inches wide for a footprint, has springs in the bottom as well as the pad. So that's nice and comfy. I do like this seat. It's really comfortable. The one thing that I would like to add to it is a suspension seat post, because this seat post, as you can see, is rigid. There's not a whole lot going on there. But if you did have a suspension system on there that kind of compressed a little bit, you would have a really, really comfortable setup. And I think that in addition with a little bit of an adjustable stem, you'd have a really comfy bike. I believe, really comfortable and stable bike. Continuing down, you have a standard set of cranks. These are just 170 millimeter aluminum cranks on it. They do have this lettering that totally looks like the Crank Brothers logo, and it says Electric Assist. That's actually just kind of a staging aesthetic. It's not a Crank Brothers product, and the Electric Assist is kind of actuated by the cranks, you could say, but we'll get into that in a little bit. You do have a 40-tooth chainring up in the front, and that's coming into the 7-speed Shimano system in the back. So this is a 14 to 28 tooth gear set in the back, controlled by a Shimano Tourney derailleur. You know, Shimano does make some better derailleurs out there, but the Tourney isn't so bad. it works pretty well. I actually have a tourney set on a personal bike of mine back home that's actually non-electric, so it's nothing to balk at. In the back, again, you do have the metal fender, and you have not only a reflector but also a light. So this is a red integrated light that goes off of the main battery. And with that, it might be a good time to go into the electric, but before we do, we'll cover a couple of other things. So the fender does mount on these nice rails here, which you do have some provisions in the back for a rear rack if you wanted to get that on there. Buzz Bicycles doesn't have a rear rack at the moment, but I'm told that they have one in development. The kickstand is actually mounted in a really nice spot. The kickstand is recessed towards the back of the bike here, and it's a fairly simple kickstand, you know, not a whole lot of guts to it, but the mounting of it in this spot is really cool because that way you can actually move the pedals backwards and it doesn't come into contact with the kickstand. And as a result, you can push the bike backwards. The pedals, of course, will move backwards as a result, and you're not going to get it locked into position when they come into contact with each other. So when you're maneuvering this around the garage or something, it's not going to just freeze up on you. So I actually like that aspect of it a lot. That's pretty cool. A nice way. So let's go ahead and dive into the electric system, one of my favorite parts. So the battery, like I said, mounts in the middle of the bike, right here in this little trap door. So there is a key. I don't have one with me, but the key kind of locks the battery into position. But nonetheless, you can always open this trap door, and there's a pin that kind of comes down to secure the battery in place for locking it up if you wanted to, you know, go into the shop or something. It has a handle on the battery itself, and you pull it right on out of there, and boom, there is your battery pack. This is a 36 volt 10.4 amp hour battery that fits into this case right here. They are Samsung cells, I'm told. You can kind of pop it into position, drop it in, and you're ready to rock. We'll close the little trap door, and there we go. There is a charge port on the battery itself. As well, there's a small little opening you can open up right here if you wanted to charge the battery through that little spot, if you don't want to take it off of the bike itself. So that's the battery pack. It's a 36 volt 10 amp hour battery pack that you're probably going to see, you know, my estimate is going to be somewhere around 15 to 30 miles of range on a single battery. Really just depends on a number of different factors, but that's kind of just an estimate that I'll toss out there for your consideration. So this is using, we'll jump into it. This is using the Tong Sheng motor system. So this is a mid-drive motor from a company called Tong Sheng that probably doesn't have a big name in America as of yet. So much so that they didn't even brand their motor. So, you know, it's not one of the things where you can look at it and know the model number and the name because it's not on there. But nonetheless, Tong Sheng actually makes a pretty good motor system, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. So Tong Sheng is a company that makes electric bike motors out of China. Like a lot of companies, like Bafang, Shengyi, for example. Tong Sheng, the first one that I actually tried from them was a conversion system. I actually made an electric bike review about it. It's called, it was on a bike kit called the Uniro Tong Sheng 48 volt conversion system. So that bike, or rather that motor system that I put onto a bike from the garage, I was actually really impressed. It had a really nice torque sensor to it on that particular motor. I wasn't expecting a whole lot coming from a brand that I had never heard of before at that time, but I was actually really impressed. It did really good. And I gotta say, I feel the same way about the motor system on this bike. This is their production version of a very similar motor in which it's a torque-based pedal assist. So it takes the information from not only the cadence, how fast you pedal, but also information on how much tension you're putting on the pedals to engage the motor system on it. So it's actually pretty cool. Let's go ahead and jump back into it, and I'll point out a few things. So these cranks, of course, they have the sticker on them, but it actually doesn't change anything on how the system interacts. These are a fairly standard crank. When you put tension on the crank, then this system is using a Hall effect sensor in which it measures the magnetic field in between the shaft, between the two cranks, and it's using that information to dole out power as a result. This is a torque-based pedal assist system, and that's how they do it, with a Hall effect sensor. And it's going off of this battery pack to put power into the rear gears. So you definitely want to be in the right gear. You definitely want to kind of keep your eye on shifting if you want to get the maximum power or the maximum speed out of this. Which, by the way, this bike is set for a 20 mile an hour top speed on pedal assist, so it is considered a class 1. Let's go ahead and turn it on, and I'll show you a few things. So this display is pretty cool because it shows you everything pretty bright and pretty big. we're out here in the broad daylight. You know, it's hard for me to see a cell phone on full brightness, but this guy shows up really well. So it tells you your battery level up at the top right, your speed, you know, the odometer that cycles through a handful of things, and your assist level. From the get-go, it starts off in eco mode, but you can press the plus button to increase the assistance level. You're kind of increasing the sensitivity is how it feels. The higher you have the assist pushed up, the more sensitive the pedal assist is to your input on pedaling. And of course, you can press the minus button to turn it off if you wish, or just turn it down to a level that fits you. So pressing the power button again will start up the lights, both the headlight and the tail light. It might be kind of tough to see, but they do light up. The rear one's going to be even harder to see, but they do. I saw it indoors. They do work just fine. And of course, pressing that button, just tapping the power button, will turn that back off again. So you have a mirrored set of controls. You have the controls here on the display itself in the center of the bicycle, but also you have a remote attachment which does the exact same thing on the left-hand side. So I guess it's pretty good for accessibility if you don't want to move your hand over too much. And I suppose you could mount it upside down on the other side if you wanted to. Or I don't know if you could take it off. It might send up an error message. Let's find out. We'll just unplug this real quick, see if it throws anything up. Yep, there's no problem. So you could, you know, do that quick disconnect like you saw me do and take it off if you wanted to. Personally, I like the remote attachment. I like to keep my hands on the controls, you know, with the handlebars itself when I'm biking. So, you know, it's something I would do. This system is pretty bright, pretty big, and I like that. Again, that kind of goes into the accessibility features of it, where it's approachable. Just anybody can get on the bike and kind of quickly understand it. There was other bikes where they have like different, you know, letters or numbers or symbols to try to decipher. They're really good. Once you get the hang of it, you can quickly glance at your bike, but on this one, it's really bright and easy for pretty much anybody to use. So I like that a lot. So that's all the specifications and everything. Let's go ahead and jump on the bike and show you how it all works together. All right, so it's a beautiful day for a bike ride, I must say. The system is really pleasant. I guess that's what I would say. I initially didn't really imagine it to be, to describe it that way. The reason why, I tried out the other Tong Sheng motor, and the torque sensor was really nice. I liked it a lot. The way that it was programmed was pretty responsive, to the point where I said, you know, you might even want to consider a system like this for mountain bike use based on the motor alone. So when I saw it in combination with this bike, which is more of like an accessible, you know, pretty close to a cruiser, I thought, oh, that's going to be a really interesting combination. And I think in this case, what they've done is they've programmed the motor such, buzz bike that is, they've programmed the motor such that it gives a really pleasant kind of power curve. So the power curve isn't super aggressive. It doesn't throw out a ton. It kind of follows what you would do when you're pedaling, if that makes sense. It's kind of what's the word? It's kind of reserved, I guess. I think that this is a very nice application for the motor system that I didn't see coming. So I'm pretty excited. The top speed on the bike of 20 miles an hour is, you know, it feels like a lot on a bike like this, because it's meant for more kind of easygoing riding. But nonetheless, it's there. If you want to crank things up all the way, you can certainly get to it. Right now I'm going about, what is it, 17 miles an hour or so, and I feel like a speed demon, because it's a pretty low speed walking path. Kind of put on the brakes a little bit. So one thing I did want to mention about the bike is the brakes. So I did mention that the brakes were not really a name brand brake, but they do work. They're going to require a little bit more attention than, say, you know, if you had like a set of Tektro hydraulic disc brakes or so. Those ones are going to be pretty well set for quite a long time. These ones, they're going to require a little more babysitting. The ride, like I said, is pretty pleasant, pretty easy going. I'm just going about 14 miles an hour or so on this path, and the stability is really good. You can take a nice turn and it feels really stable. I'm doing all this with one hand, of course, you know, with a camera. I'm kind of used to it, but it does feel nice. And I think that this is a really good bike for maybe a family that wants to share a bike with maybe a teenager, and perhaps the missus wants to take it out every now and again, and maybe even the mister wants to use it. Like, it's a pretty easy bike to get into, to commit to. and at the price point too, for $14.99. I mean, shoot, it's a pretty compelling offer, I gotta say. I'm not sure if they have any other things in there, shipping, you know, maybe you got tax in your area, something like that. Let's go ahead and climb up this hill. This is a good test. I'll go ahead and crank up the pedal assist one more to maximum. There we go. And right now I'm in third gear. I'm going pretty easy. I mean, I don't have the seat post set very high right now for the sake of the video and taking photographs and things. But I'm going pretty well up this hill without a ton of effort. Let's go ahead. Now I'm in the lowest gear. That's a pretty steep hill. I don't know if the camera can really pick it up, but it's steep, quite steep. All right guys, so we are on the Buzz bike. I've got it cranked up to turbo mode. Let's go ahead and fire it up and see how it does. Okay, that was pretty fun. It kicks in really quickly. Once you start putting some force on the pedals, that torque sensor really pops up. It's quite responsive. I like it. You probably noticed at the end of the ride I switched into a higher gear, and when I did that, you'll notice, or you probably heard, that the system put out a lot of energy, and it definitely had the noise to go along with that. That's pretty common for a lot of mid-drive motors. When you have a really high cadence, you know, the motor is trying to keep up, trying to understand what you're doing. But nonetheless, it's been a lot of fun. I like it. Okay guys, thanks for checking out the review of Buzz from Buzz. It's a pretty fun bike. I like that motor system a lot. I'm really excited to see a new player coming into the field. Always excited for that. So yeah, if you want to check out the full review for this bike, including all the measurements and all the specifications down with a fine-tooth comb, go to ElectricBikeReview.com, where you can compare this to all sorts of other electric bikes from all sorts of other brands and styles. So you can also go there and participate in the forums if you want to be active in the community and ask a question, things like that. So thanks for watching guys. Ride safe.